Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this webinar this afternoon. We understand that many are still logging on at this time, but we are going to get started in an effort to respect everyone's time and keep this to the hour for the webinar. So let me start with a few housekeeping items before we jump into the presentation. First of all, we encourage all of our attendees to use the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. However, we will address questions, all of the questions at the end. So we're going to ask our presenters to go through the presentation. We'll be covering or talking about the actual recommendations. So please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A feature for this webinar, but we're going to hold off on answering questions until the presentations are complete. Also, this meeting is being recorded for those of you who are unable to join us or wish to view it at a later time. And all the materials that you see today during this webinar will be posted on the TACC, on the TACC website under the Events tab. Before we begin with the content, let me take a moment to briefly introduce our speakers, although I know all of them are familiar faces to those of us who have joined us here online. Today, we're joined by four extraordinary higher education leaders, and I'll begin with our chairs. Dr. William Serrata, President of El Paso Community College and Chair of the Board for the Texas Association of Community Colleges. Mr. Jay Barrett, Regent at Amarillo College and the Board Chair for the Community College Association of Texas Trustees, otherwise known as CCATT. Next, two community college leaders who served on the actual Finance Commission, the Texas Commission on Community College Finance. First, Dr. Brenda Kays, President of Kilgore College and Legislative Chair for the Texas Association of Community Colleges, and of course, a Commissioner on the Texas Commission on Community College Finance. And Ms. Carol Scott, Board Chair at Del Mar College, immediate past Chair of the Community College Association of Texas Trustees, and also a member of the Texas Commission on Community College Finance. We greatly appreciate the time that each of you, all of you as leaders for our community colleges, the time that you have spent on this very important effort. It is truly historic change that will impact our colleges and its students for generations to come. It is because of this profound impact that the association wants to remain an information hub during the release, the passage, and implementation of these recommendations. We hope these conversations inform you, the participants of this webinar, and your respective colleges. So with that, I would like to hand the mic off to Dr. Brenda Kays to officially get us started and to provide a brief overview of the accomplishments that paved the way for this report. Over to you, Dr. Kays.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Ray. As many of us know, the Texas Commission on Community College Finance came as no surprise. During the 2021 legislative session, we supported the creation of the commission because we knew the current funding formula was no longer a reflection of the needs of our institutions. I know many are already familiar with the process of Senate Bill 1230, so I won't get into the details, but I do want to shine light on recent numbers published by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. As two-year institutions, we see enrollments vary by region and by institution. Last week, the Coordinating Board published preliminary enrollment data. And while statewide numbers indicate a slight increase, the public two-year sector is down in overall enrollments by just under 11% from 2019 to 2022. It is clear that as a state, we are still recovering from the pandemic, but it is certainly good news that enrollment has now leveled off. These enrollment shifts, coupled with the reality that 24 of our colleges saw reductions in funding in the most recent biennium, reinforce the fact that the current formula does not allocate funds through metrics, that measure our college's success. We are in need of a more dynamic funding model where the majority of formula funding does not divide a set amount based on contact hours, but instead allocates a larger share of funding based on the achievement of key milestones indicating student success, for which our current funding model only allocates 17% via student success points. The new set of recommendations do exactly that. What's more, by eliminating competition amongst ourselves for different slices of the same pie, we all gain by working together more effectively. Now I'd like to call on my colleague, Dr. William Serrata, to expand on the efforts by TACC to ensure these recommendations equally voice the concerns of our diverse institutions, big or small, rural or urban.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kays, and we certainly appreciate all of the work that you and your colleagues as commissioners put into this effort. I know it was a significant amount of work, and we certainly appreciate this. As I look at the final report, I see the fruits of our labor, and in particular of your labor, Ms. Scott's labor, and those of you that represented community colleges on the commission. At the beginning of the summer, TACC unanimously approved a set of recommendations that I see reflected in the final draft. There's a direct correlation in strengthening the state's incentive formulas and moving to a funding method rather than an allocation method. The formulas that include the varying costs of educating different student populations, an update to our dual credit model, which varies widely throughout the state of Texas, the implementation of data systems to track continuing education credentials, including certificates of value in our CE and technical education programs, incorporated into our outcomes funding. Funding for the startup costs of the leading edge workforce training that we engage in with business partners, granting students across all regions of the state access to educational opportunities relevant to their academic goals and state and regional workforce needs that all of us are on and working on. After my testimony to the commission last June, we saw the release of the first draft in September. At this point, we reconvened our members and trustees for a joint advocacy effort in providing the commission substantive edits. We know our voices are strong together, and today it is clear that our suggestions did not fall on deaf ears. Our effective communication resulted in the addition of dual credit as a metric, the clarification around tuition rates for dual credit, and the addition of hold harmless language to ensure each college does not receive less funding than is currently appropriated in the current formula. I want to express my sincere gratitude once again to all of the commissioners for their attention to detail in the development of these priorities, and for all members of TACC for their efforts to ensure that we saw fruitful outcomes from this respective commission. As I said, it was a team effort. A solid partner we've had throughout this process has been our trustees and CCATT. I'd like to have my counterpart with CCATT, Chair Jay Barrett, say a few words from their perspective. Mr. Barrett, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Serrata. We appreciate all the work that you've done. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honor to work with such a committed group of trustees and regents across the great state of Texas. We are blessed to partner with passionate presidents and chancellors in a collective vision to increase success for the learners in each of our colleges. We trustees have a unique vantage point as citizen volunteers and elected officials, bridging that space between our colleges and our communities. One of our volunteers has given volunteering a whole new meaning. On behalf of CCATT, I want to say a big thank you to Carol Scott for the hundreds of additional hours that she has put forth by serving as a commissioner to help bring these final recommendations to the fore. Carol, thank you. As with TACC, CCATT has unanimously endorsed the same guiding principles Dr. Serrata enumerated, and we are equally supportive of this final version. I want to assure you all that in these recommendations, trustees will still maintain their current authority to set tuition and have extra assistance from the state for these communities that have lower taxing valuations. Let's dive a little deeper into these specifics and hear from our two Finance Committee commissioners, Carol Scott and Dr. Brenda Kays. Carol?
Thank you so much, Jay. And it was my pleasure to represent trustees and to be your voice on the commission. So while these recommendations don't go into the details of implementation, we know that those details are going to come in the form of the actual legislative language and how the coordinating board and the Commissioner of Higher Education, Dr. Harrison Keller, are going to establish a lot of the details in the coming months and years. These are nonetheless transformative changes for our colleges. So I'll be joining Dr. Kays over the next few slides. We're going to bring up the slide deck in just a second, and we're going to be walking through the recommendations and providing for you the scope of the changes and, frankly, why we joined the rest of our commissioners in a unanimous support in approving the recommendations. So Dr. Kays, let's kick it off.
Thank you, Carol. Let's start with our first bucket of outcomes funding. Recommendation 1.1. This is by far the most transformative of all the recommendations.
That's right, Brenda. It starts off by resolving one of the fundamental problems with our current community college finance system in Texas. So moving away from a static allocation method of finance to one that is outcomes-based and, more importantly, a dynamic model. So this will give our colleges and the trustees tasked with oversight the confidence that our results will truly count. No longer will we be redividing the same size pie every session, but state funding will almost entirely be funded based on outcomes.
That is the kind of statutory promise our colleagues can literally take to the bank. By tying nearly 90% of state funding to outcomes with a set dollar amount, presidents and chancellors can set achievable goals, knowing that the funding will follow, rather than based upon the performance of other colleges.
So there's some baked-in advantages for all of the Texas community colleges because we're no longer competing against each other for limited funds, but rather all colleges can reap the financial rewards of their own success. So the incentive to build stronger partnerships is baked into the very foundation of this new model, and you'll see the strength of that incentive by the unanimous buy-in we've heard from every college and participating trustees.
These outcomes are based upon 4 criteria. The model will allow for future growth in funding as colleges achieve certain outcomes, such as, number 1, degrees, certificates, and credentials of value. Number 2, credentials of value in high demand fields. Number 3, completion of dual credit courses toward an academic or workforce program. And finally, number 4, transfer to 4-year universities. Despite the wide range of offerings, enrollment, and business models across our huge state, these outcomes offer something for everyone. Whether your strengths are in dual credit, industry accelerated workforce programs, or the classic academic transfer path, you stand to benefit. These are the very types of outcomes those of us working in the field have been striving to get, the sort of educational attainment that can change lives and reset the trajectory for an entire family. Most of us are well versed in the needs of our students. These recommendations offer the chance to meet those needs at the student and institutional level by accounting for the varying cost of educating different students. This is a concept similar to our partners in K-12 with their landmark HB3 Public Education Finance Bill. Moreover, the outcomes will carry an additional incentive specifically for students who are economically or educationally disadvantaged and for adult learners.
So moving on to the second recommendation on that slide, we want to ensure that our community colleges can access this foundational level of funding. So many of us already have in mind how our colleges can improve our outcomes with each of our student populations. But unless you're blessed with high property values and strong community support, these solutions may often seem out of reach. Community colleges with low population densities, expansive service areas, and limited local resources have scant ability to raise the funds necessary to enact those solutions. As an elected official who answers to your voters, I know my fellow trustees are happy to see this recommendation, ensuring that our smaller and more rural serving institutions are provided a guaranteed yield for core operations. We'll be providing a path to success that doesn't need excessive taxation to finance. The commission report recommending that this newly developed guaranteed yield will be based on actual cost and give our rural communities the breathing room they need to innovate and make the educational needs of their students in their region to meet those educational needs without having to raise taxes to do it. And of course, student success is the true big tent that's pulled us together in this broad coalition to support these recommendations.
So next, let's shift our attention to recommendation 2.1. Our next bucket captures one of the pillars of student success, and that's affordability. TEOG, or as they're called, Texas Educational Opportunity Grants, and Texas Grants are the primary state vehicles for higher education financial aid. Over the years, those funds have lagged behind the need, particularly for TEOG. We are all enthusiastic about the recommendation to increase that from 27% of eligible students funded to over 70%. And in keeping with the expanded strategy of building a talent-strong Texas, the Commission recommends expanding the uses for those critical TEOG grants to include adult learners and continuing education courses. This financial aid can substantially lower the barrier of entry for students.
Moving on to recommendation 2.2. Our commission work group spent hours discussing how a similar aid package could help firm up the state's successful dual credit programs. The final language of the recommendation begins threading that policy needle. We were recommending a potentially powerful incentive for colleges to adopt a maximum tuition rate for dual credit tuition. And by agreeing to abide by a maximum dual credit rate for tuition and fees, the colleges would receive funding for financial aid to all qualifying students. It's a testament to our fellow commissioners that they came around to such an efficient solution. Free qualification based on free and reduced lunch. So what our students are currently using in their public school system will be the qualifying threshold for this state aid. And the policy touch, it's a big carrot of financial aid rather than a hammer to reduce our governance authority. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, we don't have all the details yet in terms of these numbers, but we are all in agreement of the concept.
That's right, Carol. And I would add that our commission really made efforts to support the concepts that were already working while not forcing prescriptive mandates. One great example of that is recommendation 2.3. Additional support for the innovative workplace education partnerships that have sprung up across the state, thanks to funding for the TRUE program. This concept works for students, regional employers, and colleges. It encourages partnerships with industry and higher education for accelerated work-based learning curriculum, and it enables our students to get invaluable hands-on experience, while employers work hand in hand with the colleges to fine-tune a curriculum that is customized and is almost guaranteed to result in a better job and career path. So we're talking about additional funding for getting our students the career-connected education that they're asking for, that we've already planned with industry partners and has a lower cost of entry due to financial aid. College presidents know this sort of programming, properly funded, will be a huge success, a real game changer.
Which takes us to the final crucial bucket of these recommendations around building capacity. So utilizing the historic revenue windfall that the state is in right now, strategically, via one-time seed grant funds is the kind of kickstart that will get the ball rolling to build out these needed programs. Upfront funding for facilities, in-demand faculty, and necessary equipment will enable our communities to build out these career pathways and partnerships. This can jumpstart the progress for these outcomes, enabling the expected success that follows for more credentials, support, and efficiency, and to roll forward into future additional funding from those outcomes. Ideally, this loops into a virtual cycle where the success of today funds the potential for the future.
And that future is all the more achievable when we pull together. Let's take a look at recommendation 3.2. The penultimate recommendation makes clear the sort of improvements we are likely to see from that foundational perspective of colleges competing against their own success and not one another. The Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board will establish a center of institutional collaboration that can leverage the scale of a state as large as Texas and facilitate the planning and partnership cost over time to combine purchasing power as well as a wide variety of expertise in instruction. It really puts and pulls from both of our strengths as a state. We're huge and we're diverse. The final recommendation takes the same idea of leveraged partnerships and expands that into our curriculum planning.
So this is a recommendation that will mean a lot of work up front for future returns that could benefit a wide range of stakeholders. So incentivizing crosswalks that can turn into non-credit certificate or credentials into academic credits into a career. So this is enabling some economic mobility at an affordable price for Texans and less wasted hours.
Thanks to the effort of the Texas Success Center, community colleges have been demonstrating the effectiveness of the Pathways model. This recommendation is important because it requires us to focus on continuously improving the portability of our educational offerings and their value to our students. These incentives reward the thoughtful educational transition that, for example, can take a dual credit student, upgrade their education to a phlebotomist, who will then later return for a nursing degree. Now that we have walked through each of these recommendations, I would like to turn it back to our chair, Dr. William Serrata, as well as Chair Jay Barrett, to offer some clear next steps to what comes next. Dr. Serrata.
Thank you, Dr. Kays and Ms. Scott, for an excellent overview. Moving forward, it's imperative that we keep the same momentum. This is a marathon, not a sprint. The work isn't done until we see it in writing and it's signed by the governor. Mm-hmm. With this historic change to a dynamic outcomes-based model, I know that we all want to see the details around what this will mean in terms of funding for each of our respective colleges and what we can expect to see in the upcoming biennium. I'd like to echo Dr. Kays' earlier sentiment that we will all gain by working together rather than competing for different slices of the same pie. We know that the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board has started to work on modeling what these changes will mean for our individual colleges. As in the nature of innovative thinking, our finance system is including new dynamic approaches that will require gaining access to data that is currently not being reported to the coordinating board. In particular, the inclusion of non-credit credentials is introducing new data that is currently not collected or remains siloed within our respective institutions. There is also an ongoing need to ensure that privacy protections, data sharing agreements, and data integrity are honored as we continue to build this dynamic funding model. Those of us leading our colleges know the importance of data integrity and privacy and right now, TACC and the coordinating board are collaborating on the most expeditious path toward resolving these issues, so these important calculations are done right and correct. With that, I'd like to invite Dr. Kays to tell us more about the legislative process.
Thank you, Dr. Serrata. While our college administrators work on those data issues, the legislative calendar turns ever forward and very quickly. As you might have heard, there's an election next week, and those results of the election always influence the priorities and policies of a legislative session. Once the voters of Texas have spoken, we'll start to see the first bills filed November the 14th. Currently, the language for legislation based on these recommendations is being drafted by state attorneys. Thankfully, our years of hard work prior to this have built up enough confidence and goodwill with legislators and state leadership that we are hopeful to have a powerful and knowledgeable member sponsoring this bill once it is drafted. And of course, even the best of bills will fall short if there's no funding to enact it. And the base budget, typically released in late January, will hold special importance for us in 2023. After several conversations with budget writers and hearing Commissioner Keller, I think we can expect to see that the state of Texas truly values its world-class community colleges. Of course, even with a bill and inclusion in the budget, there will be much more debating, explaining, and yes, modeling that we will pick over and negotiate as our bill actually moves along the parliamentary procedures to adoption by the end of May 2023. We still have a full 7 months, if not more, of work in front of us.
Dr. Kays, thank you for that concise primer on the legislative process. We appreciate that. Sounds like to me we'll be getting to spend a lot of time together this new year in the next 7 months, basically. That's going to make us stronger partners, though. It also means we need to grow our relationships with those elected officials.
Sorry, I had my mute on.
I thought I said something perfectly. I don't know.
Sorry about that. Jay, I know that many of us on this call have existing relationships with returning legislators, but we will be seeing nearly 30 new House reps and senators, and this will provide a great opportunity for us to introduce ourselves as regents and trustees, introduce our college and our college presidents and leadership, and is an incredible opportunity to put their local voters and local issues to work to improve our community college system. So we never know when the freshman legislator of today will end up as a future chairman or speaker. And trustees, we're all too familiar with knowing that the thrill and anxiety of running a campaign and winning an elected office for the first time. And I can imagine that they'll have that same enthusiasm and apprehension and excitement and anxiety to get through the start of the next session. So we hope that as CATT and TACC members, that you will keep us updated on your new legislators in your region. Please let us know about new members of your delegation that have a special connection to your community college, whether they're have a family member, whether they themselves attended or a graduate. Potentially, they might have served on your board. But most importantly, do you have a personal relationship with them? And so if you can let us know that, but in addition, make yourselves known to them offering that note of congratulations when they're elected, and making sure that we have an entree for a future relationship with those newly elected members.
Carol, you're exactly right. It's all about relationships, and that's what work we're going to be doing over the next several months. As leaders of our colleges, building and maintaining these relationships will be key to seeing these recommendations that people have worked so hard to get become part of policy. Our work is just beginning. We're not near that finish line. In addition, our relationships with these returning and new legislators will continue to ensure that our college staff and stakeholders are poised to take actions on these recommendations. We will continue to empower them through webinars like these and sending information to them as it is received. Our college staff and stakeholders are the key to implementing these recommendations successfully. This is a lot of work. I want to ask everyone, are you ready to go? Because it's time. It's time to get out of the starting gate. It's time to go hard and not go to the finish line, but go through that finish line. Now that we've walked through these next steps, I would like to turn it back to Ray Martinez to address any of the questions that have come through on the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jay, and thank you all for the great presentation and the comments about the process itself. We are excited to take on the challenge that's ahead, because we know the implications of this are truly historic and transformative for our community colleges across the state of Texas. So we have a few questions that are popped in, and I will invite folks to go ahead, and we've got ample time. So if you do have questions, I'm monitoring some of the questions, and so are some of the TACC staff who are listening in on this webinar as well. So please submit your questions and we'll try to get to them. First of all, somebody asked, will there be a copy of the slide deck available? And the answer to that is very much a yes. We will post the slide deck, I'm pretty sure, to a certain place on our website, but we'll send out an announcement about how to get the slide deck as soon as this webinar is over. But the slide deck is available, or will be available. Okay, and then on to some of the questions that are starting to come in now, and I'll start with the order that I saw them come in, panelists, and I'll throw out the question. I might direct it to a specific panelist, but feel free to jump in with responses as we go along with each of these questions. First of all, the first question reads as follows. With the amount of money riding on student success, there will obviously be a huge incentive to increase outcome numbers. What measures are planned to reduce the possibility for community colleges to, quote, work the system for increased funding by lowering rigor, adding short-term and easily achieved certificates, or other methods to increase success numbers? And Dr. Sadato, I'm not going to put you on the spot on this, but there was some of this that was discussed when we heard from Commissioner Keller yesterday in our Business Advisory Council meeting about the lessons we've learned from HB3, and how he mentioned the importance of sort of putting some gate around how we define credentials of value to make sure that we have at least a threshold that we all agree upon meet sort of that definition of credentials of value. Dr. Sadatta, I wonder if you'd want to expand upon that at all.
Sure, I'll begin, Ray, and I'd ask my colleagues to jump in as well. And so you're looking at, so credentials of value are going to be regionally as well as state defined. They will look at the economic drivers within a respective region, and they're obviously looking at wages within that area. So I think that that is one of the areas that will be looked at closely over time. In addition, let's just talk about transfer. We already have transfer partners that look at our transfer success. The coordinating board already collects this data. We can see currently how our transfer students do when they transfer. If there's issues, I'm sure your transfer partner has let you know, and you've addressed those accordingly. Within our career technical education programs. We have advisory councils, and we have business and industry that sit, leaders that sit on each of those respective advisory councils that provide guidance to the respective community college currently and let us know whether we're producing what they need, where we need to tweak our curriculum. All of these things are already in place. So with regards to credentials that may not be of value, well, that's the point. We're looking at credentials of value, and that will be targeted and will be looked at specifically based on wage within our respective areas. So I'd invite Dr. Kays or anyone else to jump in, please.
I think you're exactly right on target there, Dr. Serrata. And I believe that really the list of regional as well as state demand credentials, it will change and morph with time. But I think that we will also see another area, and that's the high demand, those critical credentials of value. And that's something that we want to see for our students as much as anybody in the state of Texas. We want to make sure that they have the education and training necessary to get the wages that they need, family supporting wages, in order to not just contribute to the Texas economy, but to have a well sustained and meaningful career and life.
Any other comments? Jay, would you like to jump in?
I think I want to just say this on behalf of the trustees, is that this is the time when we need to step up and make sure that these credentials are providing value, that we're not looking to water down what we want from our community colleges, that we're looking to bolster our communities. And so this is going to be our time to learn what the regional data says. What are those credentials of value? So I see this as a time for regents and trustees to step up, learn what the Workforce Commission says regional needs are, and then help our colleges shape that future that we want for our learners. I really don't anticipate anyone trying to game that system, because it's not totally game proof, but there's going to be a lot of like you said, Ray, a lot of gates around this.
We referred to HB3 earlier in the presentation, and that was the K-12 finance model.
Yes.
And one of the things that we're seeing happening right now with TEA and K-12 is they're further honing and refining their credentials of value. Some are being added to the list, some are being subtracted to the list. And I fully believe that that same thing is going to happen as we move forward with this same structure of outcomes-based funding.
Yeah, exactly right, Dr. Kays. And as a K-12 administrator, somebody who's in a CTE high school campus, I've watched that, I've seen that happen. And this same thing is going to happen for our colleges. What this is really going to do is shine a spotlight on our colleges and bring everyone to understand what value we do have for this state. I think that's unmistakable.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much, panelists, for that first question. I'm going to move on to our next question. We've got a few more. The next question is from Dr. Satterwhite at South Plains College, and he writes the following. It was discussed that the foundational funding levels will be on a per student basis. Is the leveling process expected to be based on current tax revenues from our varying established tax rates, or as a function of the tax base that each of our districts has? And I would invite any of our panelists to jump in this one. Obviously, this may be in the category, Dr. Kays and Ms. Scott, of the details to come, that aspects of even the basic allocation formula to set the rate that we would then base a guaranteed yield upon. It's a formula that still needs to be worked out in the legislative process, but I would invite Dr. Kays or Ms. Scott if you want to jump into that question at all.
I think you're right on target with that response, Ray. I do believe that the formula itself will be materializing over the next days and weeks to come, but we do not have a definitive answer for that yet.
Trustee Scott, any thoughts about that?
We don't have an answer today, and you're completely correct. The devil is in the details, as I have said multiple times to multiple folks. So we will all be watching that very closely, and I think whether it's through mechanisms like a formula advisory committee or through the ongoing analysis and modeling that both the coordinating board staff is going to run, as well as our own staff, TACC and our own CFOs looking at the impact. There's going to be, I think, a good opportunity for us to really dive into that detail when it becomes available. But we know the coordinating board and their staff are going to make the first run at those models and to keep that internal. And we will all have an opportunity to look at that when it becomes public.
All right. Thank you all so much. Moving on to the next question from Dr. Tom Mills at Hill College. And he writes the following, and this will be an opportunity, by the way, to talk about the various funding levels that we included in the slides. So I'll read his question here. He says, the slides for the recommendations show the recommended amounts of the new funding that might be allocated, for example, 430 million, 170 million, et cetera, to account for the anticipated funding increase. My question is regarding current funding. Will the existing funding, which I believe is about 2 billion statewide, be funded per the same formula as the new funding, or will it be allocated based on current methods or other? So any of our two members of the commission, Dr. Kays, if you want to start with an answer on that particular question. Yeah.
I will. Thank you. And that is a good question. But what we're looking at is all dollars that are allocated to the community colleges will follow this new formula for the outcomes-based funding. And so that's existing dollars as well as the new dollars that will be requested hand in hand with this legislation.
Exactly. And as we pointed out early, the hold harmless language was added to the final recommendations. The idea is that the legislature would begin with the current funding level, which when you put it all together, it's about 2 billion in state appropriations for all 50 community college districts. That's the starting point. Commissioner Keller and Chairman Hunt have spoken publicly about the need that if we're going to move to this outcomes-based funding model, at a minimum, the need is for an additional, on top of that 2 billion, an additional at least $650 million and possibly more, depending on how this legislation moves forward. But they have talked about at least $650 million, and the various items, the various funding levels that we put in, that Dr. Mills points out in each of the slides, is that 650 million, how we've heard, would be broken out into the various buckets of the recommendations. So 430 million would go towards recommendations 1.1 and 1.2, which is the move to an outcomes based formula and the creation of this guaranteed yield as well. And then another 170 million for the financial aid recommendations, and another 50 million for the expanded capacity recommendations. Anything else to add there from any of our panelists?
I will add on that during the final discussion of the committee's adoption of these recommendations in October, the hold harmless language was specifically added back in with comments and recommendation by Senator Larry Taylor. Senator Taylor was very clear in his support of the hold harmless language and that it be a temporary hold harmless language. He made specific reference to public education and some of the hold harmless caveats or waivers that have now been in existence for 20 years. Some school districts continuing to ask for their hold harmless waiver 20 years after the fact. And he said, this is not intended to be long-term hold harmless. This is intended to be temporary hold harmless.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to emphasize that for our members.
Thank you. Okay, on to the next question. This question reads as follows. What recommendations do you have about the actions colleges can take now to prepare for anticipated data collection and reporting requirements in moving to this new formula? Any thoughts about that, particularly from our two community college CEOs, Dr. Saratta or Dr. Cades?
I believe that the things that we need to do is, number one, I think that we need to be talking about these recommendations and the transition to outcomes-based funding to everybody at our college campuses. I also think, of course, that speaking with our institutional research or our IR people will be extremely important. Because we have had certain baselines in the past to include contact hour funding, and that was a formula that basically was used for everything except our student success points. But this is basically going to be quite a transition. And I had the luxury of working on the commission for the past 12 months, but it is still a mindset transition that needs to happen. Because now we're talking about outcomes. It's not so much how many people are we going to get in the door, but how we are going to take care of those individuals and help them achieve their educational goals, whether that's to get into the workforce, whether that's to transfer, et cetera, et cetera. And what supports do we need to have in place in order to actually move that agenda forward? And so that's why I say, yes, it's important. We need to get new baseline data that's actually established, because we've mentioned it in this webinar, we're going to be competing against ourselves. But we also really need to think about what this new model brings to our entire college. And if there's any shifting we want to do with regards to budget dollars, personnel, et cetera, et cetera. So this needs to be a communication that is happening with our board of trustees, our faculty, and our staff.
Yeah, I would add to what Dr. Kays just referenced, agree with everything that she just spoke of. So we already report our credentials to the coordinating board through the CBM 009. I was a reporting official at once, so I remember all of those reports. In addition, we already report transfer, et cetera. That the area that I would say that we need to come up to speed is on the non-credit and continuing education. Quite frankly, the coordinating board is not at a point currently that they're able to process these. They're working on those respective areas, and we will have to come up and be able to report those as well. So it gives us an opportunity to count non-credit credentials that we know that we produce that lead to living wage occupations in our respective communities. It allows us to not only report them to the state, but allows us to claim resources from the state to be able to support these. That's the one area that I see as a shift for us to be able to count and receive credit for non-credit and continuing education credentials, and quite specifically credentials of value.
I want to add to that on the trustees side of things is that one way trustees can help is to make sure that we have the a report at every meeting, and we have a data dialogue at every board meeting that we have, so we know where we stand. So we know, what certifications are being offered, how we're doing on those certifications, and track those. That's a big way that we can do that. And so I would recommend that all 50 colleges, if you don't already do that, have a data dialogue at every board meeting.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for that. And finally, we have a few minutes left to our last question here, and it reads as follows. What will be done to address funding for our physically and intellectually disabled students? I am unsure how outcomes relate to funding for this area, but we all have the responsibility of addressing the needs for these students as they come out of the K through 12 area. More verbiage covering these students will be appreciated so that their needs are on the board to be addressed. Any thoughts from any of our panelists about that? And obviously there are many high need student populations, and with a new dynamic funding formula, perhaps the hope is that, or the hope would be, the expectation would be that more funding is going to come to our public two-year colleges, and with that, the ability to be able to address needs of our various student populations. But any thoughts about this particular question from any of our panelists?
Ray, I think you're spot on with regards to those comments that you just made, and I agree with you. I believe that the different funding mechanisms, the buckets, as we described them as we were going through the presentation, I think that there are going to be dollars available for all of the demographics that are represented at our community colleges. And I do believe that we will see with increased funding, the ability to offer those wrap-around student support services, no matter the population that we're serving, because it really doesn't matter. The goal is to get everybody across that finish line and to that credential.
Thank you, Dr. Kays. Okay, seeing no additional questions in the comments or in the chat box or in the Q&A, I do want to end with a comment from Dr. Yiannopoulos at Central Texas College. He says, and I quote, "I have discussed this legislation with my state representatives and senator, and they have assured me that they are 100% behind this transformative legislation." I would say that's a pretty good way to end this important conversation. And to emphasize once again, as we've heard Commissioner Keller say, as we've heard Chairman Woody Hunt say, as members of the commission have all echoed, we must be unified as we move forward into this legislative session that is going to be key. And so we're glad to hear that this is already that many of us are already at work in educating our members of the legislature on these historic and transformative changes. With a few minutes left, I would invite, do any of the panelists have a final thought or any comments before I turn it over to Dr. Kays to conclude this webinar? Any final thoughts?
Ray, I would like to say thank you to Nicole Eversman, who is our CATT Executive Director, as well as Jacob Cottingham, who is the TACC and CATT Legislative Director. They were both very, very valuable to me as a commissioner, and I appreciate their support. Jacob Friday, your predecessor, as well as you coming on board in the last months of the commission work. I wanted to thank the staff for everything, Ellie for her help in communicating all of the commission work over the course of the last year. It really was a team effort. It takes a village to support a commissioner. So thank you all for what you have done and for your staff work. It was really, really helpful.
Thank you for those comments. We really appreciate it. I'm privileged to work with an outstanding team here at TACC, and of course, Nicole and Kat, and our colleagues at the Texas Success Center, Dr. Cynthia Farrell and her outstanding team as well. So thank you for pointing that out. Any other further comments before we conclude? Dr. Serrata.
I'm just going to say, since we're in Texas, cinch up the saddle, hang on. This ride's got to last longer than 8 seconds.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Serrata.
I would just share with everyone, first, certainly appreciated. I think that President Yiannopoulos our Chancellor Yiannopoulos rather, is doing the right thing of going forward and meeting with your respective delegations. I think that's incredibly important, that we all are supportive of these recommendations and we continue to work together. And I would share with everyone that I've heard this analogy used repetitively, and I think it's accurate. We've had a really good first quarter. We still have the second quarter, halftime, and all the way through the end of the game, which will occur in sine die. So there's much work to be done, and certainly look forward to working with all of our colleagues, both at the CEO as well as at the trustee regent level, to be able to get this across. So thank you all. Lots and lots of kudos to the commissioners, Ms. Scott, Dr. Kays, the others who put in so much effort into this, but it looks incredibly promising.
Thank you, Dr. Sadatha. I do want to remind folks that this webinar has been recorded and it will be posted. So anybody that wants to come back and listen to any aspect of this presentation or the questions and answers can do so. Dr. Kays, I'll invite you to close out our webinar.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate it. It looks like we're going to give you 5 minutes back of your day. But I want to leave one thought with everyone. We've worked very, very hard to get to this point, and we have been united every step of the way. And I send hearty encouragement that we stay that way. There are still many miles in front of us, but I know that if we stick together, we remain united, there's nothing that we can't accomplish as a team. So we appreciate the time that everybody has spent with us today. And as we move forward, we will continue to keep you posted with how the progress is coming along. It is going to be imperative that we are at the Capitol, our trustees, our CEOs, and at the end of January, our students, as we celebrate Community College Days at the Capitol. We want everyone at the Capitol to recognize our footsteps. So with that, I'll say once again, thank you for joining us and have a great weekend.
Thank you all.